Namaste. As part of Sri Aurobindo's writings, we take up today collected works of Sri Aurobindo, volume 9, which is writings in Bengali and Sanskrit. So, bulk of these writings are from the weekly journal that Sri Aurobindo was editing soon after his release from the Alipur jail, 1909 to 1910. And the name of the journal was Dharma. But there are other Bengali writings also which have been included here, and we'll talk about it as we go by. But just a little background about Sri Aurobindo's learning Bengali and Sanskrit. So, as we know in the story of Buddha, Buddha is born and there is a prophecy and prediction that he'll either become a mighty king, conqueror of the outer world, or he'll become an inner king, conqueror of the inner world. So, his father, alarmed by this prophecy, he created an environment so that he never sees anything which is suffering. He is totally entrenched in pleasure. So, Buddha's life till 21 was all full of pleasure. Everything possible could be, provided for him. But as happens that he was married, he had a child. So, those who believe that by marriage you can stop a person from evolving further. So, see, this is how destiny operates. So, Buddha belongs to the burdened great, missioned. So, just one day he needed to see one sick person, one suffering person, one death, and that was enough for him to change track. Sri Aurobindo's father also, very intuitively, without knowing that, he would be what he would become, at the instance of his Nanaji, Rishi Raj Narayan Bose, he kept his name as Aurobindo, which basically means lotus. Sri Aurobindo, but that time the name that was given was this, so, which is lotus. It also means oro. If you look at that word, it's about the dawn. So really, if you look at it, that his name was also kept very intuitively, that he is the one who will bring dawn, and like the avatar, he is the lotus, born amidst all the mud and mire of human nature. And again, to prevent him from knowing anything about Indian culture, he was sent all the way to another kind of, even more than Buddha. Buddha at least had a palace, but Sri Aurobindo was sent to the hub of what can be called as glamour and charm. And that is England that time, it was regarded as a place where the sun never set in the British Empire because it was spread so much. So it was the hub, the happening place. And Sri Aurobindo goes there completely alienated from his culture, baptized in a way, if you want to put it. And it went to that extent that he was not even given a training about his own language. So he didn't know his mother tongue. When he went to UK, he didn't know his mother tongue. He was knowing only English. So he goes there, and for a long time, he has no contact with his mother tongue. He doesn't know how to speak in Bengali. Then during the ICS exam, because he says, where will you serve? So province is Bengal. So he used to learn a little bit of Bengali. So that's how he learned a little bit of Bengali, but not enough. Enough to clear the exam, which he of course cleared in flying colors. Then he comes to Baroda, where he starts learning Bengali and Sanskrit. So both his mother tongue and also the mother tongue in the sense of the Indian nation, the importance that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have given to Sanskrit. Now, many people feel that Dinendra Kumar Roy had come and taught him Bengali. Sri Aurobindo has corrected it. It's not true. He had learned Bengali good enough to read some of the classic works of Bengali, authors like Michael Madhusudan Dutt, all these in original. So he could read, he could even write. So, but Dinendra Kumar Roy, outwardly Sri Aurobindo gives a reason that he was called just to keep, brush it up, because you need to converse with someone. But I suspect there was an inner reason. Thanks to that association, we have such a wonderful memoirs of Sri Aurobindo, or rather Dinendra Kumar Roy, as his Bengali teacher in Baroda. Because he lived with him and he saw, many of those things, that how Sri Aurobindo will sit at night with just that kerosene lamp and with all the mosquitoes around, and he would be sitting and concentrated with books, and in his writing it is amazing. And the Maratha cook will come and give some food for him, and he would just say, "Rakh do." Okay, "Saab, khana." Okay, keep it. And this would go on late night. Then he would say, "Sir, khana thanda ho gaya hai. It's gone cold." And then he would take it with perfect samata. He's sleeping on the floor, all that. So this is the kind of tapasya he engaged in even as a young lad of 22, 23. Because he had to prepare for a certain kind of work. So he's learning of Bengali because Sri Aurobindo had decided to participate in the revolutionary movement. How can you conduct a revolutionary movement without really being able to converse in the language of the people? This is something very interesting. So he learnt it very well. Right from the time, even before he has come to Baroda, he was clear that he has to participate in the revolutionary movement. These are Sri Aurobindo's words, not other biographers. So he learned Bengali and then he started writing. And later on, when that opportunity came, he also wrote for Yugantar. This is before the Alipur jail. Unfortunately, none of those writings have survived. It's a great misfortune. Sri Aurobindo himself said, that he wished that some of these were there. And then, when he came out of the jail, along with Karmi Yogin, he also edited the Bengali weekly called Dharma. And just like in Karmi Yogi, we see that whole tone changes. So, then the Bengali and Sanskrit writings are not confined only to Dharma. They include a whole, some of the classic letters written by Sri Aurobindo to his wife, the one which was produced in the Alipur, trial as a kind of exhibit against him, where he speaks about his three madnesses. That letter is very well known. And one where he writes to Barin. Now this Barin letter is 1920. So Bengali writings are not confined to that period. The book covers a span from 1893 right up to the later years in the ashram, when some of the Bengali ladies, they didn't know any other language and they would write to Sri Aurobindo in Bengali and Sri Aurobindo will write back in Bengali. Those letters are one of the sweetest letters that one can ever imagine. So I would really, there are letters on the mother, but very, very sweet letters. One of the letters I still remember, it was, given out once as a message. Original Bengali I may not be able to recapture, but it was, "Mother is the goal, mother is the path. If you have her, you have everything." Such direct letters. That mother is the goal, mother is the path. If you have her, everything is there. You don't need anything. Everything you will get. So, such direct letters, even about obstacles, difficulties, and all full of hope. He's saying you should not despair, just remain open to the mother. So, those letters are in themselves extremely powerful. You have these volumes of letters of Sri Aurobindo in English, but these carry a very different fragrance. So, please read it. Then there are poetries he wrote in Bengali. And almost all of them carry a nationalistic fervor where he is awakening the soul of India. So the soul of India is awakening through, there is one, The Mother Awakes, we have read it here. Then there is one, Ravana Vanquished. Then there is another one where he describes that this Vaishnava cult has forgotten the true Krishna. They are all happy dancing and this thing, they have forgotten that Krishna is also Chakradhari, that there he writes. And again he speaks about the Buddhist cult. That the Buddhist cult, they are now happy with their pot bellies. It's very powerful. But what do they know of Buddha? Buddha is mighty. He tramples over desires and ego and walks. If you read those poems, it's amazing. Then there is a poem called Living Matter. So living matter is about, he sees Purusha and Prakriti come together and literally in an embrace and kissing each other. It's a vision that he describes of, matter which is a throb with life. So there are some of these wonderful poems. And then, of course, it crowns with Hymn to Durga, which is not prose, not poem. It's a hymn. So hymns are characteristically songs or prose writings which are sung in praise of the Lord. So we know that in Hymn to Durga, he has invoked the goddess who guards India's destiny, which is Durga. And there is another hymn also. There are some small hymns, other hymns also, but there is another hymn called Hymn to Dawn. So these are some of these main writing. Then there is a whole set of writings in Bengali writing, which are, I would say, must read. Actually, I had not read them for a long time. So I had read all the other volumes. I said Bengali writings I'll see later because there was no translation which was available. And my Bangla reading and speaking was too poor to really read that way. And so was Sanskrit. So I waited, then I got this volume. And when I started reading, I said, this should be read first. Then Secret of the Vedas, Essays on the Gita, which I had read already. The Upanishads, because they contain writings on the Vedas, on the Upanishads, on the Gita. Puranas. People who want to know what is there in the Vedas. So, secret of the Vedas, he takes off at a very high level, where his main concern is, what was the Aryan tongue, the origins of Aryan speech. But somebody wants to know what exactly are the Vedas, what do they contain? Or someone wants to know what is Upanishads, what are the Vedanta. So all that you will find there. And the classic one is Gita Bhumika, Introduction to the Gita. This is a must read for anybody who really wants to understand about and you see, that was the time when Sri Aurobindo had received the Gita directly from Sri Krishna and was given in Nirukta. So the beauty is that Gita, I take it that incidents in Alipur jail where Sri Krishna hands over the Gita as the first sign that the avatar of the past was handing over the baton to avatar of the future. And next 16 years, there is a period of intense preparation. The 10 limbs of yoga have been given to him, rather 18 years. And then 1926, he finally merges his avataric personality into Sri Aurobindo, that now it is your age and you continue. So, given that the introduction to the Gita, basically the first 6 chapters where he speaks of everything, but he also touches especially 2 chapters, the world spirit, and the other one which is Sanjay's divine vision. People have tendency to, I don't know, these are myth stories, but Sri Aurobindo had the subtle vision and he had the divine vision both. Because he had seen Krishna, you cannot see the divine without a divine vision. Even subtle vision is not enough. So he describes that what really is gross vision, subtle vision, divine vision, how you really see God. All these things are described very beautifully in these 7 essays or articles on the Gita. And some of them are with the slokas. He gives in essays on the Gita, entire Gita is covered slok by slok, but without really referring to them that there is a sloka and there is a meaning, because it's flowing directly from the highest source. But in Gita Bhumika, we'll find all these. So we'll read some of them just to complete this picture. There are also stories. There are also stories, and we know the 2 stories which are there as part of the Bangla writings. One of them is Swapna, the dream, a dream. So a dream describes about the subtle intricacies of the karmic law. Normally we look at karmic law only from the surface, which is outer acts, outer reward and punishment. Evidently, if God also sees like this, then, this is basically flawed, because you're looking at the act outwardly and the reward is also outward. Punishment is also outward. But Sri Aurobindo changes its whole understanding into karma being, karma has to do a lot with your inner consciousness, your inner state. For instance, a man may be very philanthropic. In that story itself, this bhava comes, this knowledge comes. But he may be doing it all with tremendous egoism. I am giving, I am the giver of dana. Then this is not regarded as a very, great karma. It is a rajasic karma which will bring its own rewards and punishment. Then the rewards and punishments are also inner. And the story is a very, very sweet story, one of the best that I have ever read, where there is this poor man. Usually, see, this is how Sri Aurobindo was changing and molding the future. That was the time when communism and socialism, there is no God. Why would he create an unequal world? Some are rich, some are poor. So the poor must snatch money from the rich with the barrel of a gun. Now here is Sri Aurobindo, he takes up precisely this theme head on. If you look at it, the story, there is a great meaning in it. So there is this poor man, Hari Mohan, and there is this rich man, Teen Kodi Seal. And poor man is saying to Krishna, every day I pray to you and I can hardly, 2 square meals. You are not a good guy. And if I find you, I'll catch you, I'll, beat you up. Because opposite I see Teen Kodi Seal with all the riches, though he is a wicked man, greedy man. And that time Krishna comes and tells Hari Mohan that I have come. And he says, no, why have you come? No, you beat me. You said you beat me. It's such a sweet starting of the story. And then he said, no, I don't mean it like that. He said, but I am very happy because my devotees tend to put me in places and put malas, but I love you. Treated me like a living being. And then he takes him into the inner being of Teen Kodi Seal and shows him what a mess, what a horror that life is. So it's even about the inner worlds, there is such a beautiful revelation about what are hell and heaven and how by yoga you can conquer the senses. All that is there, amazing story. And then the other story is also very interesting. The story is ideal of forgiveness. Now, why did Sri Aurobindo of all the stories pick up this one? See, this story is a small little incident in the life of Rishi Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. So why ideal of forgiveness? Now, if you see, that was a time when there was Christian missionaries even now preaching the gospel of forgiveness, compassion embodied in Christ. Now, here is Sri Aurobindo bringing out an indigenous truth about forgiveness, but not born from any outer thing, but from the highest state of inner realization. But a compassion which is uncompromising with the ideal of truth. That is the beauty of the story. Vasishtha loses his children just because he is not ready to tell something which is not right about Vishwamitra. So in this story, though it's ideal of forgiveness, it brings out the Aryan ideal in a very beautiful way. And then one day Vasishtha comes to, kill him, and that time he catches a conversation where Vishwamitra comes to kill him. Vasishtha is talking to his wife that, there is very little salt. Why don't you go and ask Vishwamitra? And she says, you want me to ask him, who is a arch enemy, who has killed all my children? How can you ask me to do it? He says, no, he's a good person, he's a real rishi. It's just that, you don't judge him by all these acts. So she says, if such is the case, why didn't you tell him earlier? So he says, because he had a lot of pride in him. You see, so many things are intertwined. If you really arrive at that state, you will be humblest of the humble. Now, when Vishwamitra hears all this, his heart undergoes a change. He goes and falls flat at Rishi Vasishtha, and that time he says, you get up. So he says, you give me that highest knowledge. Now I have come as a disciple. He says, no, you can't get from me. You can go and ask Anantadev. So he goes to Anantadev and asks, give me that highest knowledge. He says, okay, I can give you, but let me see whether you can. To give the knowledge, I have to get relieved of my work. I have the earth on my head, in Indian image, on Sheshnag head, fun, that hood, there is the earth, very symbolic image. Sri Aurobindo at one place says this is a true image. It is not an image but a fact of inner existence. He speaks of that. So he says, can you hold the earth for a second? He says, of course, with my tapobal I can do it. Now imagine what rishis were there. They could hold the earth from falling apart when the cosmic powers have done away with. It literally means they have become equal to the cosmic powers or even greater. But that time, Vishwamitra couldn't. So Vishwamitra, says, it's going away. And Anantadev says, so hold it. What can you give? He says, okay, I give all my merits. Still it doesn't stop. So Anantadev says, see, there will be chaos. Give whatever best you have. He says, all my tapasya I give to hold the earth. Nothing. So then Anantadev says, wait a second. Have you met anybody who is really a realized person? He says, I don't know. Maybe Vasishtha. He says, oh, you have met Vasishtha? Okay, you give the merit of meeting Vasishtha. So he says, okay, very reluctantly. And the earth stops. Look at it, this is known in Indian tradition. Ek ghadi ya do ghadi yadon mein punyad. Tulsi sangati sadhu ki hare koti aparadh. This is not an exaggeration, just meeting a really realized person one moment. And when it stops, so he says, oh, okay, it has stopped now, you give me the gyan. He says, fool, a person whose one moment of company could give you that power that all your life you couldn't have with tapasya. You are asking me for that gyan? Go back to him. So he goes back. But now he's a little angry. Why has Vasishtha not told him this? He could have straight away given me the gyan. So he goes back and tells him, why did you not give me straight away? So he says that, you know what? If I would have given you straight away, you would not have believed it. So I had to go through that process. Now you come. See, that's how I look at it when people come to Mother. They don't straight away realize, because the mind concept is the French lady. All gods have to be only in India, nowhere else. World is only India. But they turn to Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo is like, every way he fits the image, our image of the greatest. And he is not just an image, wonderful, beyond comparison. Then at some point, they chance upon Sri Aurobindo writing the Mother. And then saying Sri Aurobindo that Mother is the one, Mother is everything. Then they are in a fix. Now he is saying, go to mother. But now they are prepared and ready. Okay, fine, we go to the mother. So this is how, when he comes back to Vasisht and falls at his feet, and that time Vasisht tells Brahma Rishi, get up. So it's a story which is not just about forgiveness, but about truth, about tapasya, about, the capacities of the rishis of yore, but it ends very beautifully. It ends by saying that, such were the rishis born in yore. And many such rishis and are going to take birth, who will go even farther than the realizations of these rishis. So it is something amazing, he comes out with that profound truth. So these two stories. Then there is another, very well-known writing, The Chariot of Jagannath. So all his writings in the dharma and nationalism, if you look at it, it is reconciling something which was yet too much in the future. Now, what is that thing? The integration of nationalism and internationalism. This is a confusion even now which persists, that what is really nationalism and cry for human unity. So in Chariot of Jagannath, he takes up the Rath Yatra and gives it a completely new sense, and it's worth reading. I mean, positive time, we are not going into detail, but he speaks about the four wheels. It is much in the way in Bhagavad we see that it starts with a cow whose 3 legs are gone, and she's standing on one leg. And King Parikshit asks, who are you? She says, I am Dharma. What is this strange sight? He says, my 3 legs are gone. I am standing only on Shraddha. All others are gone. All the limbs of Dharma are gone. So here it describes the chariot, the 4 wheels of the chariot. And how such an ideal society where we have unity, fraternity, such a society has not yet come into existence. He speaks about the Sattvic society, the Rajasic society, the Tamasic society, and this is very interesting. Tamasic society. Tamasic society, he says, like many of like India of today. And he's writing then. And what is the Tamasic society? Tradition is the only thing, antiquity. Whatever is going on for generations. So he compares it to a bullock cart, which will not meet with an accident, but God knows when and where it will reach eventually. Then the second one is Rajasic society, which is, then he says, is like modern Europe. You are sitting in a taxi and you are running at high speed. And there is a lot of joy that the people who are sitting are getting. But you don't know whether it will crash the next moment or where it will go. So because that's the Rajasic society. And then he speaks about Sattvic society, which is about India of olden times, where everything is according to a Shastra, a Vidhan. There is a place for everything, because Shastra is about time, place and person. If you want to understand anything, whether it's right or wrong. So there was no moral rule like this. But it was in context of time, place, person. This is the law of causality operates within that. So you have to see whether the time is appropriate. Later on, this time became muhurtam and all, but originally there is a season of life. There is a moment when things are ripe, when you are ready for the realization. So time. Then place. So there was a lot of importance to space and how you keep it. There are secret spaces. And then there is, of course, the person. Adhikar Bhed. This was very, very prominent in ancient India because, see, modern liberal thought has destroyed many of these things. So, for instance, one of those things are like, don't be judgmental. Right? Nowadays, the in thing is, don't be judgmental. So, you know what it means? It means that stop discerning and discriminating. There is a faculty given to man called Vivek. Tell it to go to sleep. So, of course, in life you cannot take a step without judging. Judgment is what? There are 2 possibilities you choose. There are 2 aspects you choose. So, don't be judgmental should actually be don't condemn anyone, which is different. Don't hate anyone. But if you don't judge and indiscriminately you go about life, you will land up in soup is a good thing, but in a net of forces. Don't be judgmental. So another thing which has come nowadays is unconditional love. So everybody wants unconditional love. Nobody is ready to give unconditional love. But unconditional love only God can give, and those who are united with the divine can give. At a human level, there will be not conditions put, but there will be expectations, hopes, egoism. So these are the larger frame of the Bengali writings. Maybe I'll just take a little slice from there before we go to the Sanskrit writings. So Durga Strot is of course well known, so I'm not going to read. But there is a writing which he wrote much later, Hymn to Dawn. So this is not written during the period, it's written somewhere in Pondicherry, and I don't remember the date now. And it starts with this: Lo, dawn, the beloved appears in a gleaming young body. She impels all life on the path towards the goal. Fire, the divine force, is born to be kindled in man. Dawn drives away all darkness and fulfills herself in creating light. She, the goddess, rises, lifting her forward gaze towards the vast, the universal. She has put on the robe of light and displays the white brilliance of her subtle norms of truth. Heaven gold is her hue, her vision is all round seeing. Verily, she is the mother of the herd of brilliances of knowledge, a leader of her bright days. Her luminous body is disclosed. See, this dawn comes recurringly. Savitri starts with dawn, the symbol dawn. Ilion starts with dawn. Ahana is all about dawn. So, this dawn, which is the first moment of truth, we can use the word, when the first gleam of the sun that shines upon life. So, what happens with that? People have an idea, oh, pursuit of knowledge, this is, you become too serious, and people want to just enjoy life. But look what Sri Aurobindo is saying. He says, the goddess, all enjoyment she is. How can you really enjoy without light, without wisdom? What we call as enjoyment is not really enjoyment, it's a very degraded aspect of it. So he reveals to us what is the secret of enjoyment. Eye of the God, these are the words he used. Behold her, the mother of radiance. So there later on we'll also see hymn to the mother of radiances. So many people attribute it to Sri Aurobindo, but actually it was written by Amrita. And he gave it to Sri Aurobindo, who massively corrected it. Means he corrected it here and there. So it can go as Sri Aurobindo's name because, but it's a unique hymn because it's, and one of the very powerful hymns. So I must say, but that's a different writing altogether. All delight is within. All that is hostile to man is afar. So let it be in thy dawning. Goddess dawn, manifest thyself in our hearts in the play of the supreme effulgence. Widen the life of this embodied being. O Mother of Delight, give us stable impulsion. This thought we also find in one of Sri Aurobindo's poems, which probably we'll read one of the days, Perfect Thy Motion. That is also written around 1909, 1910. We'll read during Sri Aurobindo's life through the poems. O Goddess, born in perfection, daughter of heaven, we foster thee with our thought streams, and thou too holdest in our bosom the knowledge, one and the vast, and the sun seas of delight. Then, just a little writing. See, we have all this about Agni in the Vedas, in subsequently people. In India, Agni is, of course, Agni is not only in India. If you look at the Western myths, the fire, Prometheus, and fire, birth of fire, so much is there. And people do it even today, Home, Yagya, all these priests, sometimes it becomes too much, when they do 18, 20 Havan Kund and all that. But it is so surprising that people don't know what is Agni. And it may sound very strange because what it really stands for, what it really means. Why is fire worshipped? And even ancient, you see Persian civilization and subsequently the Parsis actually have fire temple, and Vedic civilization was so much centered around Agni. Who is Agni the god? Is it just this fire? Now look what Sri Aurobindo has to write. It is on part of the writings on the Veda. Who is this Agni? The root Ag means power. One who is powerful is Agni. Now Ag, the leader, the forefront, power, and powerful is Agni. Again, the root Ag signifies light or burning. The power which is flooded with the burning light of knowledge, the effective force of knowledge. The possessor of that power is the Agni. See how he is saying step by step. The root Ag has also the sense of priority and predominance. Age. This must be first. Fast forward, this is the first thing. So it means the first one. The force which is the primordial element of the universe, the basic and preeminent force among all the manifested human universal forces, the possessor of that force is Agni. The root Ag also has the meaning Nayana, to lead, to direct. One who is the possessor of the primal, eternal, ancient, and sovereign force in the universe and leads it by the appointed path towards the appointed destination. The youth who is the general of the army of God. That's why you have Kartikeya. Kartikeya's story is all about the universal fire, Veshwanar. So he is the leader of Deva Senapati. So he's unique, and that's why the Vahana is victory, which is the peacock. Why peacock? Because peacock eats away all the snakes. You see that if you read the story of Garuda and this thing. So the equivalent on earth is peacock. So peacocks have this capacity. So snakes are symbol of hostile forces and the peacock can prey upon the snake. Only those snakes survive in front of peacock who are around Shiva. Okay, so the path, who by his knowledge and power props various forces of nature in their different activities and keeps them on the right path. Agni ne supataraye. So it shows the right path. That Pyusa is Agni. All these virtues of Agni have been mentioned and hymned in hundreds of suktas of the Veda. The original cause of this universe, hidden in all its development, the most fundamental of all forces, and paramount among them, stay of all gods, regulator of all dharmas, guardian of the most profound aim and truth of the universe. This Agni is no one else but the omniscient, energizing power of the divine, manifest as force, heat, and brilliance. The principle of true existence in the truth, consciousness, bliss contains in itself the consciousness. So you see, he is basically speaking of the Divine Mother in her omniscience and omnipotence. That power is the divine energy which is inside. And then we understand what is the meaning of Kundalini awakening. So this is one. Then there are many other beautiful things. He speaks about Agni, the divine energy. Now, what is Upni? What does Upanishad mean? Of course, there are many things which are written about it, I've read. But look at what Sri Aurobindo writes. The word Upanishad means to enter into a secret place. So, when I had read it, it was written that there are two meanings. One is to enter into the heart of inner knowledge. The second was to sit at the feet of a master. But Sri Aurobindo speaks of it so beautifully. The rishis did not obtain the knowledge mentioned in the Upanishads by force of argument. We'll debate and discuss and decide whether God exists or doesn't exist. I can tell you, this is of course my own view, you can debate and discuss and you cannot come to a conclusion that whether I exist or not. And I am not joking, nor welcoming a debate. But it's true. If you really debate and discuss, you will end up in a point where you will end up in a void. And you won't know whether you really exist or not. Whether what you call as yourself is a product of this, that, 100 things. Where is you? Who are you? At the end, it will all collapse into nothingness. And leave aside God, whether he exists or not, by this non-existent creature, I. Extensive learning or from the flow of inspiration, but earned by yoga, the right of entry into the secrecy of the mind where hangs the key to the integral knowledge. There is a very beautiful essay on the integral yoga in the Upanishads. Then Isha Upanishad, which Sri Aurobindo said is the foundation of the life divine. If you really look at the Isha Upanishad, those 18 verses, it's a clear-cut foundation of divine life, where it is telling neither to live in this darkness, not to end up with non-being, non-birth into that oneness beyond, but to combine the two. Any attempt to discover the meaning of the Upanishads by argument alone is equivalent. It's equivalent to investigating a dense forest with a lighted candle from high tree tops. Direct vision is the sunlight which illumines the entire forest, making it visible to the seeker. Direct vision can be attained only by yoga. What a logical way of going and telling us that, look, if you really want God, don't just keep admiring the pot, go ahead, drink the nectar. That's the only way to really find God. At one place he says, amongst his writings on nationalism, a group of writing, what really is Indian nation? And there he speaks about the Hindu-Muslim problem. He speaks about, how you should regard the country as mother. And he says that the problem with all these different movements which tried to unite India, for instance, Raja Ranjit Singh in Punjab, and Shivaji, and others, Guru Gobind Singh. So he says they saw India as mother, but only as the mother of a limited, like mother of Sikhs, mother of, Punjab, mother of Marathas. So he says you have to have the vision of India, the mother, and she is a part of the universal mother. Otherwise, your nationalism will become counterproductive. So all this is there in that. He in fact tells that, the Mohammedan, he can disown the religion, but can he disregard his mother? He is also born of the same soil. This sentiment must awaken. So he says the independence of India is only a secondary aim. The main object is to reveal the power of Indian culture, its spread and victory throughout the world. What we find today today things are changing, but some time back it was just the opposite. The Asura had so much hypnotized India that everything in Indian culture was regarded as bad, evil, and everything that came from the West, from branded shoes to the necktie. And it was so easy to ape and fool people. Even till today, I can tell you that if somebody walks on the road, comes from a Mercedes, gets down with nice branded shoes, with a necktie and suit, you will think he's a big man, though he may be the worst scoundrel on earth. And somebody who comes like wearing an ordinary dhoti, we have these two examples in Sri Aurobindo Ashram. When Vasishtha Ganpati Muni came, he was in very ordinary clothes and people didn't allow him to enter. And mother had to send Champaklal, who is this person calling my name constantly, let him in. And on the other hand, another example of a prince of Lanka who wanted to stay in Golkund. And the person ran to mother, mother, he wants to stay in Golkund. No! Mother, Prince of Lanka. I said no. Mother, but how will I tell him no? He's, such a big man. Said, he's not what he's claiming to be, posing to be. Mother has not met him. Mother, how do you know? So mother poked into his belly. You want a proof from the divine? You want a proof from the divine? How do I know? He turned away, face fallen. What will I tell the Prince of Lanka that we don't have place for you? He comes out, and that time a judge is walking in. And the judge asks this fellow, what is this fellow doing here? He said, no, he's a Prince of Lanka. Prince of Lanka is a convict. You want proof from the divine? So you see how we are misguided by appearance. It's just hypnosis. That's why we walk in. See, Swadeshi. How can Swadeshi really take place if you still have the image of a branded showroom? And what is happening in a branded showroom? Things are made for 50 rupees by local weaver. And it is sold in a branded showroom. If you go to the local weaver, you will bargain. 50 rupees nahi bhaiya, 40 rupees ka milega. You go to the branded showroom, the same thing with a brand put 500 rupees is a minimum, I don't know. And you will very happily bring it. So this is the kind of hypnosis, it still goes on. So, but anyways, so all this he awakened during this period. Then, of course, he speaks about the difference between India and Europe. The main difference between our country and Europe is this: our life is turned inward, Europe's outward. That's what we were speaking about. We judge of good and evil, etc., from the point of motive. Europe judges it on the basis of action done. Knowing God as one who dwells within and who knows all that passes in our minds, we seek Him in the soul. Europe looks upon Him as the King of the world and seeks and worships Him in the world outside. How beautiful this is, The heaven of Europe is in the material world. Worldly riches, beauty, luxury are welcome and to be sought after. If they imagine any other heaven, that too is a reflection of these riches, beauty, and luxury. Unfortunately, we have just picked up from there, and all the serials show like that. Their God is akin to our Indra, who rules the world empire, sitting like an earthly monarch on a bejeweled throne, swollen by the hymns and prayers of 1,000 flatterers. So, what about the God of India? Beyond Indra, who dwells? Shiva. So, he says, our Shiva is the supreme among gods, yet he is but a beggar. Out of his, look at the subtle humor and the delight of how he is describing. Yet he is but a beggar, out of his senses, uncaring and forgetful. Our Krishna is a youth, fond of laughter, fun and love. It is in his nature to be playful. The God of Europe never laughs or plays. I am saying this way because very often you will see when, hymn which is read out. You see, you can see it in the intonation. That when you see people saying mantras or prayers in India, it will be Om Jai Jagadish Hare, Om Jai Jagadish Hare, Bhakta Jano ke Sankati. People are just enjoying. In between, there will be fun also. People will laugh at each other. Now you go into a typical church. It's not against anything, but you you feel, isn't it? You feel that you are in some very serious place. No, I have gone to both. I was in the convent, so, I used to go every Sunday, you have to attend the church. But I used to say, why are they so serious? My problem was moral science was so serious. The church, you go and you feel so serious an atmosphere. And, in our house, it was Om Jai Jagadish Hare, and everybody is smiling and enjoying. Jai Hanuman Jnana Gun Sagar. You see the difference. And it, till today, the way, if you read Mother's prayers and meditation, or some of these people who with it, that kind of bent will read it with as if, coming from, it becomes so unnatural and artificial. In a way that even the Divine Mother would not use. If you read how Mother has herself read, Gloria Tva, you see her whole being is thrown out in a power. That's very different. That's the way one should read it. Gloria Tva, Señor. So, this difference, because of the God of Europe never laughs or plays. Since his majesty is hurt by these activities, his godhead suffers. The extrovert attitude is at the back of it. Signs of wealth are for them the support of splendor. Our loving, gay Krishna is the hero of the Kurukshetra, father of the worlds, friend and companion of the universe. India's immense knowledge and subtle vision, unfettered divine vision, pierces through the material veils and brings out the inner attitude. But was he trying to say that, they should remain divided? No. Sri Aurobindo says, the unification of the West, East and the West is the religion of today. He says, several writings later on, that they must come together. But in this task of unification, if we consider the West as the foundation or the chief support, we shall be making a grievous error. You see, what is the foundation today? Liberal thought. That's not the thought. There is one divine within all creatures. This can be a foundation. The self is one. The forms are many. You can't build it on the basis of an indiscriminate sense of freedom. It's in fact is the best way for the asura to creep in. So he says this will be grievous error. The East is the foundation, the chief support. The outer world is established in the inner, not vice versa. And that one can see in the whole evolutionary history of the geography. Evolutionary history of geography, whatever sense it carries. Geography and history. If you go back to the most ancient civilizations, see Chaldea is gone, many others. But after Chaldea, if there is any civilization which is the most ancient, is the Vedas. Then slowly all this came much later. Everything which became more and more outward looking comes later. But the root goes back to the Vedas where, you are seeking it inside. And it's very beautiful. The peak of these writings are ultimately of course, Hymn to Durga, and the other is Tales of Prison Life. Tales of Prison Life were written for the Pravartak. If I am not mistaken, this was the Pravartak Sangh, where, one second. No, it was written for Suprabhat. So, Tales of Prison Life is about Sri Aurobindo being in the prison during that 1 year. And of course, in Uttarpada's speech is given the essence of it. But what was he doing? You'll have all kinds of stories and wonderful stories. But what was the state of these people? That place you see Sri Aurobindo at his sparkling best in terms of wit and humor. You cannot imagine that how could Sri Aurobindo in that state when that sword is dangling over the head, what kind of samatha this is? This goes beyond samatha, is delight of existence. As if everything was a delight. And I'll just read a few lines from here. I did not know that that day would mean the end of a chapter of my life. That day is when he's taken to Alipur jail. During which period all my human relations would cease. That for a whole year I would have to live beyond the pale of society like an animal in a cage. And when I would re-enter the world of activity, it would not be the old, familiar Aurobindo Ghosh. Rather, it would be a new being, a new character, intellect, life, mind, embarking upon a new course of action. That would come out of the ashram at Alipur. First ashram. That's what he says in one of the aphorisms, that I went to a place full of holy men and I was bored in their company. God took me to an ashram and I found God there. Took me to a prison and I found God there. There is another writing about prison and freedom. That how true freedom is inside. It's not about doing whatever we want. It's about discovering God within. That alone can give man true freedom. It would have been more appropriate to speak of a year's living in a forest, in an ashram, hermitage. For long I had made great efforts for a direct vision of the Lord in my heart, had entertained the immense hope of knowing the preserver of the world, the Supreme Person as friend and master. Look at it, it was not that he suddenly went and Krishna came. For long this was nurtured inside his heart. I want to see him, I want to see him. So God said, you want to see me? Yes. Okay, come with me. Where does he take him? To a prison. Just imagine. Most people would say, Lord, are you sure? He'll say, I took your prayer too seriously. That's why the mother says, if you give yourself to the Lord, and the divine says yes, then the whole world cannot keep you away. So this is what happens to him. He says, but due to the pull of 1,000 worldly desires, attachment towards numerous activities, the deep darkness of ignorance, I could not succeed in that effort. At long last, the most merciful all God, Shiva Hari, destroyed all these enemies at one stroke and helped me in my path. Pointed to the yoga ashram, himself staying as guru and companion in my little abode of retirement and spiritual discipline. The British prison was that ashram. And then he describes with great humor that how they had given him a privy, all of them, within the cage. And it was cleaned only once during the day. So whole day, if you have to go second time, it stinks. And he speaks humorously that, I had heard about the Westerns having a attached toilet as a luxury. But this was too much of a luxury. So, at one place he says very beautifully, I have also watched the strange contradiction in my life that however much good my well-intentioned friends might do for me, it is those who have harmed me. Whom shall I call an enemy? Since enemy I have none, my opponents have helped me even more. They wanted to do me an ill turn. The result was I got what I wanted. So what an attitude. I look at my enemy and see Krishna's face. Then he speaks about the ball. They used to get one simple plate. But more dear and useful than the plate was the bowl. Among inert objects, it was like the British civilian. Just as a civilian ipso facto is fit and able to undertake any administrative duty, be it a judge. So look at the humor and the satire. Any administrative duty, be it as judge, magistrate, police, revenue officer, chairman of municipality, professor, preacher, whatever you ask him to do, he can become at your merest saying. Just as for him to be an investigator, complainant, police magistrate, even at times to be the counsel for defense. All these roles hold a friendly concourse in the same hospitable body. My dear Baul was equally multipurpose. What a remarkable, luminous intelligence, sparkling with wit, and showing at one stroke, on one side, the fallacy of the ways of the British comedy. He speaks about British justice. At the same time, he is revealing how we can take these things and this is the attached bathrooms, oftentimes a part of Western culture, but to have in a small cell a bedroom, dining room, and WC rolled into one, that is what is called too much of a good thing. We Indians are full of regrettable customs. It is painful for us to be so highly civilized. Look at the satire. All this myth about civilization, we have come to civilize those who are downtrodden, uncultured, uncouth, unlettered peasants. He's saying, better leave us. Don't civilize us so much. Anyways, so this is something which, of course, we have read all his life there, which comes in this part. And I have already mentioned about these two letters to Mrilani Devi, where he speaks about three madnesses. But there is a letter where he says something very interesting. He says that, maybe I'll just take it out. Need a help. Letters to Mrilani. So, always God has an unexpected way of suddenly saying, okay, I'm here, tell me. So anyways, in that letter, he speaks about what he is really doing. And people have this idea that, they ask this question, why did he just leave Mrilani Devi and come away? It's not true. So in his letter, he asks her to come along with him. And he asks her with such a beautiful way. And this is like a path that, we all can follow. Letters to Mrilanini. That's the subtitle. If you type, it will come. So there he says what path he is, after the three madnesses. He says, will you come along with me? And then he says, you will say, what can I do? Just imagine Sri Aurobindo, those heights, even then. And what his wife would have felt, how can I walk on this path? You have had vision, you have had such experiences, you are practicing yoga. How can I follow the path? So he gives in brief what really a most ordinary person, people often ask, what should we do? Because, all this is too high for us. And there he tells her what to do. He tells her, all that you need to do is to have faith, or you can type three madnesses, you will get it. So he says that, have faith. Then he says that just sit for half an hour. That's all that is required. And entrust yourself in the hands of God. And He will do the rest. He will compensate for all the weaknesses that you may have in your nature. And then what is the weakness? His compassion. He says that, you have one weakness inside you. What is the weakness, he says? He says, you're too innocent, too simple. You believe anything that everybody tells you. So you believe these Brahmo Samajists and you don't trust really yourself in the hands of God. You believe God is an abstraction. So you are unable to really surrender to Him. So this is the... Yeah. Otherwise, no problem. I think I have... Yeah. Yeah. So in this letter, just we'll read this and then we can probably stop. At the end, what does he ask? He also tells her that, God has strange ways. He brings good out of evil. All these beautiful things. Now I ask you, this is Sri Aurobindo's, she is asking Mrilani Devi, now I ask you, what do you want to do in this matter? The wife is the Shakti of the husband. Are you going to be the disciple of Usha and adulate the Sahibs? must be one of the friends. By the way, Usha Haran Kabya is also part of this. So, anyway, are you going to be the disciple of Usha and adulate the sahibs? Would you be indifferent and diminish the power of your husband? Or would you double his sympathy and enthusiasm? This was the idea of husband and wife in the ancient times. Of course, it is given that husband is following a high ideal. He is not just, anybody. You might reply, what could a simple woman like me do in all these great works? I have neither willpower nor intelligence. I am afraid even to think of these things. This is what we often say, that what can we do? Sri Aurobindo's yoga, so many volumes, so many big things. How can we even think about practicing this path which even great people don't understand, though they lecture about? I can tell you finally, Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, only Sri Aurobindo and the mother perfectly understand. Remember that. So, she says, what can I do? They'll make us understand what is needed for us. So he says, there is a simple solution for it. What is the solution he is giving us? We don't have will, we don't have intelligence. You are asking us to come along. What do we do? So he says there is a simple solution. Take refuge in the divine. What a wonderful word. I just can't imagine that life could be so simple, yoga could be so simple. Later he made it even simpler, because divine is still an abstraction, Take refuge in the mother. And this is the truth he carries on till, that letter to Nirodha. He says, one of the two central secrets of this sadhana is to psychically open to the mother. Another place he says to take refuge in the mother. Mother Sri Aurobindo is my refuge. Can really it be done like that? Then the second thing in that letter he says, aspiration for the divine life. Here he says, step on the path of God realization. So what will happen then? What stages will happen? Lights will appear, sound will appear, I'll see visions, hear voices. No. Cuts through the entire thing. He says, he will soon cure all your deficiencies. Fear gradually leaves the person who takes refuge in the divine. Swalpamasya dharmasya. Even a little bit of practice gets us rid of much fear. And if you have faith in me, now he is not telling directly, and if you have faith in me and listen to what I say, instead of listening to others, I can give you my force, which would not be reduced by giving, but would on the contrary increase. Such a direct that, it is said of Buddha that his first disciple was his son. There's a touching story about it. When he comes back after realization, he has to initiate people. And if children used to come, he would ask them to go back and take permission from parents. So Buddha's son, Rohit Ashvi, comes, Rohit or Rahul. Anyway, so he comes and meets his father and he says, I want initiation. So Buddha says, all right, I initiate you. Then his wife asks him, you are still attached to him as a father? You don't want him to take my permission? Very touching episode. So that's not what detachment is about, that I am nobody, is nothing. It's not like it's an inner state. That's the way the poet has tried to, or the story as it goes. So with Sri Aurobindo we see, she is one of those, Barinda, one of the first people whom we can say Sri Aurobindo initiated into this yoga. We say that the wife is the Shakti of the husband. That means that the husband sees his own reflection in the wife, finds the echo of his own noble aspiration in her, and thereby redoubles his force. Would you always remain like this? I shall dress well, eat good food, laugh and dance and enjoy all possible pleasures. Such a state of mind is not called progress. Nowadays, the life of women in our country has assumed a very narrow and humiliating form. Abandon all these things and come with me. We have come in the world to do God's work. Let us begin it. And then he says, there is one defect in your nature. You are too simple. You listen to all that people say. And finally, he says, don't divulge this secret to anybody. You will get strength from your devotion to God. Your praying to God will bring you that strength. And then in the beginning, this was my secret without divulging it. So what was should be the secret? People often say, first step he had silent mind, and so people strive for silent mind. Sri Aurobindo himself says that the silent mind came to me by the grace of Krishna or Kali, or the Guru, if you want to put it. Sri Aurobindo never gave himself that credit that he tried something and got the silent mind. And behind it there were years when he was just striving, as aspiring. So here he says finally, you are already inclined to philanthropy and sacrifice. Only what is wanting is the strength of mind. You will get that strength from your devotion to God. Your praying to God will bring you that strength. And then he says, this was my secret. So simple. We thought Sri Aurobindo's secret was that he was, reading a lot of philosophy, engaging in a lot of discussion. And then this was the secret of his realization. He says, this was my secret. Without divulging it to anybody, reflect over these things with a tranquil mind. There is nothing to be afraid of, but plenty to think about. So what do we do in the beginning? People often ask, how do we begin? How do we begin? This is how we begin. And then he says something. In the beginning, you won't have to do anything more than to devote half an hour every day to meditate on God. How do I begin? Here is the answer. So what do we do during that time? You should put before Him your strong aspiration in the form of a prayer. Easy English to understand. The mind will get gradually prepared. You should always offer to Him this prayer. May I not come in the way of my husband's life and his ideals and in his path to God realization. May I become his helper and his instrument. Will you do it? That's how the letter closes. So we have touched upon the Bengali writings, the Sanskrit writings. We'll touch next week. Namaste.